Greetings, everybody. Welcome. There's a little surprise for you to start things out today. Welcome to a special presentation of Armor of Truth Live. This is number 146, and we're talking about Gaia worship. We can't say a whole lot about it because, so we have to talk around it, kind of like we do other issues, because out here on the big tech platforms, you're really not allowed to challenge the official narrative regarding the climate and what may or may not be happening. So just going to report these stories to you best we can, and remind you, if you want to join us for live streams with live chat where we can speak freely, join us at armoroftruth.net on Friday evenings. Be with us there tomorrow evening at 7:30 for another live stream. Come join us, register for the live chat, be with us there. We'll provide you with plenty of links, lots of resources to get your own research if you'd like. And today we're talking about, climate change. COP26. What is it? What is it? Why is it? Let's get started there. Well, according to Wall Street Journal anyway, the meeting, COP26, officially called the 26th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP, C-O-P, an acronym for Conference of the Parties, has taken place every year since 1995, except last year when it was canceled due to the global pandemic. This year is the 26th iteration of the UNFCCC conference, which is called COP26. The climate summit is being held in Glasgow in the UK, was held from, actually is being held right now from Halloween through tomorrow. And the aim is to agree on new measures to meet pledges for emissions cuts and financial support made under the Paris Agreement reached in 2015. The assumptions are this is what we need to be doing. We all need to be focused on this issue. So, because last year's COP was canceled, the Glasgow Summit is the first to be held after the first 5-year review cycle under the Paris Accord. It's also the first COP to take place since the U.S., the planet's second biggest emitter after China, rejoined the Paris Accord. Former President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the agreement, but President Biden reversed that decision in one of his first moves in office and is aiming to show that America can be a leader on global warming. That's a strange way we can lead in global warming if we really try. That's a strange way it is, isn't it? Anyway, so who's attending? Most governments have sent delegations, in some cases their heads of state. Mr. Biden gave a keynote speech you might have seen recently in the news where he fell asleep, famously, at this meeting. France's President Emmanuel Macron, if you're from North Carolina, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, India's Narendra Modi, all attended. Greta Thunberg, the 18-year-old Swedish climate activist, arrived by train. Not very carbon conscious, was it? Executives from many big multinational. It's important, right, that she arrived by train. It's important to say that. Listen, I'm going to offer you some counter arguments today. Now you'll have to wait till the end of the show, but that's where the counter arguments are going to come. Well, we will. I'll give you a nice counter argument right here at the beginning too. Just hang on. Executives from many big multinationals, activists, and non-governmental organizations from around the world are planning to attend for at least part of the 2-week meeting. Mark Carney, former head of the Canadian and United Kingdom central banks, and now UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, also in attendance. So you can see what we've got here. And there is Greta arriving at the COP26 by train. No comment. So anyway, that's what the COP26 is. All right, it's a global event, and if you're not down with this, then you're caught up in wrongthink. All right. What about this here? What are we talking about? I do have, I'm going to play a couple clips for you. Now, Jordan Peterson, who some of you may know his history. being involved in a UN committee to research climate change and what could be done, what should be done. I want you to listen to his statements and what he has to say about it. All right, and you're going to hear a little bit from Greta as well. That's part of this clip. Check this out.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school.
Agreed.
On the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
So I was wondering whether you thought climate change could be an issue that could unite us all on left and right, moving us beyond debates about C16 to discussions at the UN at Katowice next month.
Okay, the question on the floor is, can climate change unite us? Is this the issue that's finally going to bring everybody together? Are we finally going to be united? And Jordan Peterson has a perspective on that. I would contend a well-informed perspective on it, given his position on that committee. Check this out.
Where perhaps humanity might finally discover its global map of meaning.
No. I mean, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, the first reason is that I spent a lot of time reading. I worked for a UN committee for 2 years on sustainable economic and ecological development, and read a very large amount during that period of time and learned a lot, much of which made me much more optimistic than I had been before I read the relevant literature.
There's the first point. Reading the relevant literature, Jordan Peterson came away encouraged after reading the relevant literature. So why do so many seem to be convinced otherwise? Is it true that there are that many people convinced otherwise, or is it just the people who have control of the narrative? Let's continue.
Which was a real shock to me, but the climate change issue is an absolutely catastrophic, nightmarish mess, and the idea that that will unite us is that's not going to unite us. I mean, first of all, it's very difficult to separate the science from the politics, and second, even if the more radical claims are true, we have no idea what to do about it, and so no. And besides, it's even worse than that. Here's one of the worst things about the whole mess is, so as you project outwards with regards to your climate change projections, which are quite unreliable to begin with, and the unreliability of the measurement magnifies as you move forward in time, obviously, because the errors accumulate. And so if you go out 50 years, the error bars around the projections are already so wide that we won't be able to measure the positive or negative effects of anything we do right now. So how in the world are you going to solve a problem when you can't even measure the consequence of your actions? Like, how is that even possible? And besides that, well, what's the solution? What are we going to do? Switch to wind and solar? Well, good luck with that. Just try it and see what happens. We can't.
So, and there's one of the claims right off the bat from COP26, from the Pope even, is that's wind and solar. That's the answer right now in the Midwest. Farmers are being, well, specifically it's a different story. Farmers are being having their farms, well, taken away through process of eminent domain for a carbon reclamation pipeline. That's a deeper story. I would direct you to Ice Age Farmer for that story. That's his lane. He covers that very well. But the point is here, it's going to take, just to get started, an area of land about the size of South Dakota for us to put up wind farms and solar farms. Not in any is in no way going to reduce carbon output. It's going to cost more to put those. And just another point here: where's all this land going to come from? How are they going to acquire the land? What if you don't want to give up your farm? Anyway, so solar and wind farming, it's It's been discussed for decades. It's not the solution.
Store the power. Germany tried it. They produced more carbon dioxide than they did when they started because they had to turn on their coal-fired plants again. That wasn't a very good plan, but we don't want nuclear. It's like, okay.
You can see there the one who asked the question has just heard something that doesn't match his or her worldview. I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson, you're guilty of wrongthink, according to the young person here.
What happens at night? Oh, the sun goes down. Well, isn't that something we should have taken into account? Oh, we got to flip on the coal-fired plants. Well, so it was a complete catastrophe, and all that happened was the price of electricity shot up. There's like zero utility. So that's not a solution. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we should cut back. We can't consume as much as we are all consuming. It's like, well, maybe, except the data that I've read indicate that if you can get the GDP of people up to about $5,000 a year, then they start caring about the environment, and the environment cleans up. So you could make a perfectly strong case, I think, and a reasonable one, perhaps even a humane one, that the actual idea would be to get everybody in the world who's poor, desperately so, out of poverty as fast as possible, which would increase consumption in the short term, because then they'd start to care about the environment and things would clean up.
Now, there's another good argument. Why don't we focus on developing nations, bringing them up, right? That would be a good way, as Peterson explains here, his theory anyway, and here's someone who has read extensively and written extensively, at least from the United Nations perspective anyway, on this issue, give people, help people, not give, we can't give, we need to help people out of poverty. But no, that's not the plan, is it? That's not the plan on the table. The plan on the table is to bring developed nations down, right? To bring everyone down to a certain level of austerity, right? Not a movement for humanity, but an anti-human movement. That's the truth behind what we see. All right, so let's continue.
Like, okay, well, what are we going to do about global warming? Well, good luck figuring that out. I don't see a solution on the horizon. I look at Bjorn Lomborg's work. I really like Bjorn Lomborg. I think he's a real genius. You can look him up if you want. He took the UN millennial goals. There's 200 of them. That's way too many goals if you're serious about goals, by the way, because 200 goals isn't a plan. It's a wish list. You have to prioritize. I'm serious. You have to prioritize. But they won't prioritize because each of the goals has its constituents. And if you prioritize, then you irritate the constituents. But if you don't prioritize, then you can't implement the plan. So what Lomborg did was gather a teams of economists, multiple teams, some of whom were Nobel Prize-winning economists. He had them assemble teams. He had them rank order development goals in terms of their return on investment, all of the teams. Then he averaged across the teams and came up with a final list. And addressing global warming wasn't even on the list. The most fundamental, he wrote a book called How to Spend $75 Billion to Make the World a Better Place, and that's not very much money on a global scale. Almost everything that he recommended had to do with increased child nutrition in developing countries. It's like, these things are complicated, man.
There you go. What we're being presented is that it's just this simple. We have to stop climate change. That's what we're told. We must stop it. Well, how? How do you propose to change the rotation of the earth? How do you propose? Well, this is because there is no answer. This is a political issue, and it's being used. It's being used by the few to get more control over the masses. And we'll show you that. And today we're also going to show you how this is, if the science doesn't work out, if people aren't convinced by the science, that is you're supposed to follow the science as if there is one monolithic thing out there called science and it gives us all the answers. As Peterson said there, this is a complicated issue. Very complicated issue. And I'm also operating under the assumption here so far anyway that there is a problem. I'm just doing that for the sake of the argument. My personal opinion, I don't think there is any climate changes. It always has, and certainly it changes. And yeah, I guess human beings can affect it to a very tiny degree locally. But the problem is, when you seek out, right? Remember we talked about mimesis, mimetic desire the other day, and how you could cause a group of people to want the same thing. And in doing that, you need to come up with a scapegoat. You need an enemy. The problem is here is the enemy is us. The enemy is you. You're the one causing the problem. People can't hardly can't seem to understand that that's where this leads, is ultimately the limitation of humanity. Depopulation would be the answer, right? If the earth was this living organism, and it was most important, well, then depopulation would be the answer, right? Because there's just too many of us. That would be part of the argument. Now, here's another good link, or good clip, where you're going to see pseudo-moralistic stances being taken. And yeah, I'm showing you some Jordan Peterson today. Listen, when you're out there looking for people who are speaking clearly on this topic, well, there aren't many. There aren't many because you're not allowed, for one thing. And, well, you can see it's an emotional issue. This is a very emotional issue. Very few facts. Well, there are facts, but facts aren't necessarily true. You just give people a lot of facts, and they are overwhelmed with the facts, and they think something needs to be done about the facts. But why is there so much emotion tied to it? It's because it's political. It's not a real issue. It's a political issue. So let's listen to this little piece here. This will be entertaining for you.
I want to know, what is your answer to young people for some of the really big problems facing humanity, like the climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market? Because they just don't, you talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets to have responsibility over. So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
Well, it's actually rather difficult to answer a question that ends with your comments are banal, politely. So, I would consider that more of an opinionated personal and political statement than actually a question. So why don't you try reformulating that so that there's an actual question there?
What is your So what is your advice to young people when you talk about you need to be individually responsible, but when there are things that are so far out of our control, like climate catastrophe, like the precarious job economy?
I want to point out, as she's just stated the problem with the problem. It's out of our control. It's just, how do you deal with things that are out of our control? Well, that's right. Climate change is out of your control. That's the con, man. That's the scam. That is the scam. It's not something you can control.
Like the
not as
economic
far out of
crisis,
your control as you think.
What is your answer to
Do you think
people
that
who
you're
are
worse
facing
off
these
than
questions?
you think that you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think there are different.
And there's a very basic statement that everyone needs to consider when you start thinking about how awful things are today. Even those of us on this side of the argument, be very careful about complaining too much about how you have it. Or do you have it better off than 2 or 3 generations back? I mean, it depends on what you mean by better off. I'm sure you have to define some terms here, but generally, folks, we have it pretty darn easy. All right.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
Jordan, once again, we're not going to cross-examine our questioners. So try answering the question about collective responsibility on climate change, for example. Pick one part of that, because the argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility. So I think that's the core of the question. Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, and then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders.
Everything he's just said are basic tenets of the Christian worldview. Liberty, to personal private property, biblical concepts that you get from the Christian worldview, right? This is the worldview that provides the framework for these things to work.
and then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world.
Boom, there you go. People who don't have their own houses in order need to be very careful about going out and rearranging the world. So there you go. There's where we want to start with this. And so people are catching on to the fact that this argument is weak. People can go outside and walk around. I shared with you yesterday, though, the media is bombarding us with stories about how it is. Remember, this, when we talk about, I have to be very careful here, when we talk about things like this and things like have happened over the past 2 years, health-wise, these things exist in the hyper-real world. They're out there in this world that has no referent to reality. Yeah, some things are happening. There's things happening here in the real world. Yes, but the way it's reported. So I can't say much more than that here. I don't want to get the channel removed because I have a different opinion. But I think you can follow what I'm saying. But the problem, as Peterson says here, and let's just make the statement once again. Everything he's just said, personal responsibility, individual liberty, private property, these are concepts. Let's just be more specific. The Reformation, Protestant Reformation, Puritans gave us, made it possible for us to have the United States of America, this experiment, this great experiment of freedom. And so the further we move away from that, the further we move away from liberty and freedom. So the problem here with we're talking about this issue, whether we're talking about climate or health, as it exists in the media, in social media, is separating the science from the politics. That isn't done out here in the world of the screens. It's all one thing. So I want to talk about, for a minute before we get into this religious movement, I want to talk about the element of Agenda 21 or 2030 that has recently become more clear than at any point before. This is climate change being used as a context for a new global religion. So as you can see very well from the clips we've had here, emotions. There are a mountain of emotions attached to this issue. The topic of climate and human responsibility to the earth as our home has grown into a raw nerve issue. And it's now to the point where both sides can't find any common ground to work from. And that's not because there is no common ground, but because the skill of effective debate has been demolished. You've seen it here. The lady in the audience, she couldn't just ask a straightforward question. She had to make a political commentary. And Peterson called her on it, rightfully so. We can't debate anything effectively in the public square today because we're so easily given to emotions that disrupt and disturb reasonable discourse. Emotions are driving all of these current movements that we see in the world right now. So we can no longer effectively debate important issues. Why? Why has this happened? Why has posturing and flamboyance become the method of persuasion? How did that happen? Just indulge me for a second, a little sidebar here as I just open the door and enter into another contentious issue here on this platform anyway, where challenging official narratives is actually taboo. I want to comment on the social justice movement for a second to help explain why public debate has become so fancifully fruitless. The movement is actually so void of reason and grace that it is seriously unhealthy. Why is the social justice movement going to fail? I mean, that is, if it wasn't being so propped up by the powers that be at the moment. Well, it's because their methods are simply reintroducing racism as the first and only original sin. Unity cannot be the goal of a movement if its first move is to re-aggravate everyone's biases and then sideline the actual reason that racism exists in the first place, which is that we are fallen creatures. And thus, the new gospel of social justice obfuscates the only real answer to inequality and sin, including racism, which is the receiving of a new heart from the Savior, Jesus Christ. It is relevant here to mention the social justice movement along with Agenda 21, the man-made climate change movement, because they are simultaneously promoting new religions, new global religions. But why is the social justice movement so treacherous is the question. Because its methods, also the climate change movement, because its methods are only going to make things worse. The evidence for that is already in, and it's clear to anyone who hasn't already been blinded by their emotions and their feelings, rather than objectively considering the reasons why we do struggle in certain areas of life. That reason is that we are fallen. You're going to hear me say this again and again, that we are fallen creatures, and in our natural, unregenerate condition, we find it very difficult to agree on anything that affects us on a personal level. The truth is, in our natural condition, we want to be God. We desire power. We want to be as God. We love idols. As John Calvin said, our hearts are factories for idols. And our favorite idol is the self. Now, all that's been accomplished so far in the social justice movement and the climate movement is a new segregation. Segregation is back, and it has many forms today. I would suggest to you Australia, for example. We talked about this the other day. You would think that totalitarianism would be stamped out at the first sign of it rearing its head again, right, from what we've seen in history. But no. There is a very hard totalitarianism, it seems, cropping up on the planet now. And you can look at places like Australia to see that happening. Well, most of the population blissfully ignorant to it. But what has been the result of all this so-called conversation in the social justice movement? Focus on new terms like anti-racist, white fragility. What's actually been gained from it? Well, all that we can see so far is that now, before a person's opinions or statements can be considered, now we must first determine exactly what shade of pink, tan, or brown their skin appears to be. And that's not even enough. Then we're forced to consider the speaker's possible level of access in their community or society. In other words, skin color and perception of privilege are now the qualifiers of whether a speaker or an actor can be trusted or should even be allowed to speak on relevant issues. For example, Robin DiAngelo in the book White Fragility said that if you are white, your input, your opinion, or advice is not needed or welcome because you don't have, on issues of race, your opinion is not needed or welcome because you don't have the experience from which to speak according to what is arbitrarily deemed, anyway, to be the accepted narrative. And the same is being seen in the climate debate in the form of identifying any person or group that challenges the officially enthroned opinion. They'll just call you anti-science. You'll be deemed as irrelevant, unwelcome. So the social justice gospel, like the climate gospel, is simply old school racism repackaged for a new generation. So I have to ask, is our memory really this short? We are especially susceptible to repeating past sins when our young people are indoctrinated into groupthink rather than being classically trained to think on their own. And it's my opinion anyway that this is an operation in controlling the masses to make it possible to rewrite our history according to any expedient new narrative that they may need. Truth, absolute truth, cannot exist in an authoritarian regime. But for those of us who affirm the transcendent authority of God, our Creator and Savior, this is just more evidence of our nature as human beings, as fallen creatures. Our natural instincts are not always reliable. That is some of the most valuable advice you'll ever get from anyone. Your instincts are not always reliable. So you have to rely on something outside of yourself. And it better be true, or it's no better than your unstable instincts. In this case, there is a new movement pushing forward an old conversation, where the content of one's character is at best maybe the third or fourth characteristic considered in determining a person's reliability or trustworthiness or relevance. How can this be? How can this movement be finding an audience today? How is it possible that this kind of thinking has infiltrated even the church? The answer is not esoteric. It's clear and it's obvious. It's plain and simple. Two things: compulsory public education and biblical illiteracy. And these things affect all areas of life. Now, if you happen to be new here, I really hope you're following along and that you'll listen all the way through this argument. What I am not saying is that because we know we're fallen creatures that there is an excuse for bad behavior. I'm also not saying that recognizing that we live in a fallen creation means that we might as well just go ahead and litter and pilfer the planet into extinction. What I am saying is that grasping this essential truth of our existence, that we're fallen creatures living in a fallen creation, that is the proper starting point for understanding the world in which we live and the nature of all of us created in the image of God as His special creatures. Fallen creatures living in a fallen creation explains things truthfully and provides the answers for how to manage our way through whatever crisis may show up. The answer for justice among men and women is the same as the answer for appropriate stewardship of the planet and its resources. Trust God, the true God. Now, how have we got here? I harp on this. How did we end up here? Well, through history, the great philosophers struggled with unifying nature and grace, the realm of the particulars with the realm of the universals, the finite with the infinite, unity with diversity, reason with faith, autonomy with theonomy, free will with determinism. So by the time we get to Hegel and Kierkegaard, all attempts at unifying nature and grace were abandoned, and humanism was firmly planted. This, of course, has repercussions in the sphere of morality. How do we know what is good? How do we know what is evil? How do we know what the right answer is to these problems that come up in the world? When man becomes the measure of all things, when the transcendent is rejected or lost in the shuffle for earthly supremacy, all that's left is man and nature, and as we've seen through history, worship of the finite is inevitable in that case. The creature worshiping the creation. Now we're being sold the idea that man is autonomous. We're back to the Middle Ages. We're being told that those in power know the answer, that they know how to solve the problem that they created. Man has no global existential solutions. After all, if science is absolute truth, if science is God, and all of this existence is just chemical determinism, random chance acting on matter and energy, how could any solutions be gained? How could you trust science at all? If it is, in fact, an eternal universe of chance, then how can you trust science if it's all chance? with no transcendent guarantee that hydrogen or carbon will act today the same way it did yesterday, then how is it that atheistic materialist scientists, the ones that everyone says they're following, how can they make any predictions about anything at all? They're borrowing from God. To do the basic duty of science, which is observation, they're borrowing from the Christian worldview. Scientists are able to make observations because the universe and its elements are predictable. There is a definite order to creation. The truth is, nature and grace work together just fine. Whether the philosophers have found a way to explain it or not, nature is uniform because of grace. But reasonable Christian values have been deemed old-fashioned, haven't they? They're not allowed. In many cases, Christian worldview is too extreme to be allowed in the public square. The Christian worldview is said by the world to be unacceptable because Christians make judgments, because Christians claim to know truth from error, because Christians call evil by its proper name, evil, and good by its proper name, good. Now, you'll read or you might hear it said today that Christians are just too judgmental to be allowed into the discussion. But here's the question. What is truth? How do you know what it is? All of those people who claim that the Christian worldview is too extreme are themselves also operating from a worldview that makes truth claims and judgments about what is good and evil. But what the slick ritual of groupthink does today is it makes it seem like truth can't really be known, that it's up for grabs. Therefore, all opinions are relevant without judgment, which fails instantly because they don't allow the Christian worldview. But it fails instantly the second they pretend to be objective. No one is objective. Neutrality is a myth. In fact, the attempt to be neutral is sin. How can you say that? Well, just take the topic of abortion, and that settles that. So what happens when the world rejects reason and pretends that morality is subjective, while at the same time posturing one moral argument after another as to why we ought to listen to them? What is left when man has no foundation for truth and pure religion is lost to relativism? Well, let's look at some examples. Let's show you what it looks like when that happens in the world. We see today in the news from world governments, the media, and from a new breed of activists. We're being sold an old pagan theology, which has been rebranded as the new enlightened method of religio-political discourse regarding the earth and climate and healthcare and on down the line. But now, Gaia worship is on the scene, bigger than ever. We see this term and this ideology blossoming all over. What was only a few years ago just a concept found almost exclusively in New Age circles or circles of mystical religious practice is now being seen and taken very seriously by secular authorities and the world's largest religions, namely the Pope. So Gaia. What are we talking about here? That's one depiction. Here's the more accurate, the Greek depiction of Gaia. What is Gaia? You're going to hear this. You're going to hear this mentioned. It's out there. In Greek mythology, Gaia is the personification of the earth and one of the Greek primordial deities. What is a primordial deity? Those are the second most ancient gods according to Greek mythology. They descend from the three most primitive gods in the universe, which are known as Chaos, Ananke, and Kronos. The first generation of primordial deities are widely considered to be Gaia, goddess of the earth, Erebus, god of darkness, Nyx, goddess of the night, and Tartarus, god of the end. who are each born from the void of chaos. Gaia is the ancestral mother, sometimes parthenogenic. Now pay attention. What does that mean, parthenogenic? Parthenogenesis is a natural form of asexual reproduction in which growth and development of embryos occur without fertilization by sperm. Immaculate conception. In animals, parthenogenesis means development of an embryo from an unfertilized egg cell. For example, divine. She is the mother of Uranus, from whose sexual union she bore the Titans, the Cyclops, and the Giants, as well as of Pontus, from whose union she bore the primordial sea gods. Her equivalent in the Roman pantheon was Terra, which we get our word terrestrial from. So as you can see, this Gaia concept is not new. And it's not just some innocuous generalization intended to get people thinking properly about the planet. This is, at its core, a religious movement. If you want to use an academic terminology, this is syncretism. It's a syncretistic movement. What do we mean by syncretism? Let's see. Here we go. This will help you out a little bit. Syncretism is the reconciliation or fusion of differing systems of belief, as in philosophy or religion. We're speaking about mostly about religion here. It is the attempted reconciliation or union of irreconcilable principles or parties, the confusion of things that don't fit together. Specifically, the utilizing elements of religious practices that are essentially different. They don't even affirm or even recognize the same God or even maybe a God at all. In layman's terms, syncretism is just mixing up a bunch of religious practices to create a religious practice that is more acceptable to one's own needs or for a larger purpose. Examples: Gnosticism, a religious dualistic system that incorporated elements from the Oriental mystery religions. Judaism, Christianity, and the Greek religious philosophical concepts, for example, were particularly prevalent during the Hellenistic period, the period that was influenced by the Greeks. A great example of cultural syncretism, for example, is the Rastafarian movement in Jamaica. African, Hebrew, and Christian religious practices blend together with a Caribbean freed slave culture and a 19th century Pan-African identity to make something influenced by many cultures and religions that is completely unique. Right? We're told today that to be completely unique, that's the goal. Right? Well, is that true? It is the inappropriate blending of non-Christian religious ideas or practices with the Christian faith. Simply put, syncretism is the replacement or dilution of essential truths of the gospel through the incorporations of non-Christian elements. How do we know when this happens? Well, theology matters. We're biblically illiterate. We're theologically illiterate. People will tell you today, all I need is Jesus, right? But who is Jesus? The minute you try to explain who Jesus is, you're into theology, right? So we need that. We need good instructors. We need good teachers. We need pastors who spend time teaching the flock how to defend the faith. But now, we've identified Gaia worship. We've identified it as not new. We've identified it as syncretism, the blending of world religions. Let's see where this is showing up out in the world today. All right. Here we go. Yeah, that's the Pope getting blessed by an Amazonian pagan priestess. It doesn't matter if you're Buddhist, Hindu, pagan, Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. We're just all part of the same big family, right? We just need to learn how to peacefully coexist, and then we can save the earth, right? Is that right? That's what we're told. That's what we're led to believe, that it doesn't matter whether you have the truth or not. You just need to get under this roof with us. In his desire, the Pope's desire, to see his dream of a one-world religion come to pass, in his lifetime, Pope Francis has written a document outlining how unsaved, pagan, tribal people in the Amazon are indeed part of the body of Christ. No need for evangelism. So when we think about a verse like Revelation 17, verses 3 through 5, a word there, fornication comes up. What is the fornication spoken of in Revelation 17? It says, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman," now, in Scripture, usually a woman is referring to a church. More specifically, usually it's talking about the church, Jesus' church. But it is, in this case, a woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color. There's power. So we're talking about a church. And decked with gold and precious stones and pearl, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Okay, so we know it's not God's church. So what church is this? And what are these abominations? What are these filthiness of her fornication? This is the confusing of religions. Typically, fornication means the coming together of human beings in a sexual way. In this case, the confusion of religions coming together. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. I'm one of those who takes the traditional Reformed position that it's quite possible that the papacy will produce the Antichrist. If we're working on a premillennial eschatology, which is up for debate. Pre-mill, post-mill, these things are up for debate because, listen, Revelation is not, after you get past chapter 3, it's not always clear to us at this point in history. Some of the post-millennialists will tell you, though, that they can see that a lot of this has already occurred. That's not what we're here to talk about today. If we're taking the classical premillennial approach that there is going to be an Antichrist figure, I happen to be in line with those reformers who think that might be where it comes from. I'm not saying that that's him, but I don't know. I don't think it's important for us to be looking for it either. But we do need to be able to make judgments in the world that we're in. Pope Francis, starting back in 2014, instituted Islamic prayers to Allah in the Vatican. In 2019, he called for Catholic schools to begin teaching about Islam, and he signed something called a Universal Brotherhood Concord with Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb after kissing him on the mouth, which was odd enough, but and there are too many of these instances to list here, but more examples in his Instrumentum Laboris document, which says that the pagan Gaia worship of the earth done by the tribal people of the Amazon fits perfectly with the teachings and doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. Francis, for some time now, has been pushing this kind of New Age gospel. I think it goes beyond New Age gospel. I think we're into something a little more devious than that. The Vatican has released the preparatory document for its upcoming Pan-Amazonian Synod of Bishops. This has already occurred. Document called Leo Homan. And it contains yet another window into Pope Francis' green-friendly Gaia worship worldview, in which he subtly and deceptively turns traditional biblical Christianity upside down. Now, there has been some pushback, though. seems to be, whatever you can trust of the reports, a group of more than 30 Catholic scholars and clergy signed an open letter to the bishops pleading that they hold the Pope accountable for his anti-Christian, anti-Catholic teachings with regard to marriage, just for example, his moral teachings. They declared him guilty of at least 7 heresies. Let's identify one of his contradictions right now. Publicly will speak against abortion, at the same time publicly encouraging everyone to receive the juice. And we know that some of those medical treatments were developed using aborted fetal tissue. We have a moral case to make there. So there's a contradiction, right? Against abortion, but not in the case when it comes to this secular movement here. Contradiction. But from the document, he says this: a contemplative, attentive, and respectful look at the brothers and sisters, and also at nature, the brother tree, the sister flower, the sisters birds, the brothers fish, and even little sisters like ants, larvae, fungi, or insects, allows the Amazonian communities to discover how everything is connected, value each creature, see the mystery of God's beauty revealed in all of them, and coexist amicably. That's chapter 2 from Instrumentum Laboris. So it goes on. The Pan-Amazonian document titled Instrumentum Laboris will do nothing to assuage the fears of these 30-plus brave Catholic leaders, anyway, who pushed back. But it's classic Pope Francis, peppered in with radical political ideas cloaked in religious verbiage and lovingly promoted as eco-theology. We did a show here a few months ago called neurotheology, where the idea of implanting things into our minds and ultimately finding God that way. Here's another example of an aberrant theology. But among the many strange proposals in the document, here are some. In paragraph number 98, training centers in the Amazon where the teaching of Pan-Amazonian indigenous theology is requested in all educational institutions. This is Pope Francis in Catholic, speaking for the Catholic Church, requiring these things to be done. In paragraph 98 as well, it says, it is suggested to integrate indigenous theology and eco-theology that prepare... What is eco-theology? That's the earth is God, Mother Nature. Listen, if Mother Nature is your God, well, God the Father is not your Father. It can't be. It says, anyway, it prepares them for listening and open dialogue where evangelization takes place. Evangelization into what? Also in paragraph 98, it says, it is requested to deepen an existing Amazonian Indian theology, which will allow a better and greater understanding of indigenous spirituality to avoid committing the historical errors that ran over many original cultures. To avoid committing the historical errors, like the Protestant Reformation. Right? We have our first Jesuit Pope, and what is the Jesuit order but the Counter-Reformation? The document exalts Amazonians' desire to live in harmony with nature and in dialogue with spirits. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody confused about what's going on here? Reading through Instrumentum Laboris, you can come away with the impression that Western Christendom, that just means Christ's kingdom, defined by its capitalism and colonialism, represents the world's sinners, while pagan Amazonian Indians represent the saints. It's all very expedient when the Pope speaks. We Christians need to be evangelized as much by the pagans as they need evangelizing by us. Does that make any sense? This is what we mean when we say we're looking at a new world religion that is syncretistic. It's all about diversity. If you remember our graphic on grace and nature. The goal is diversity. The document is full of references to Mother Earth while touting a new Pentecost based on the diversity of religion and culture. That is, quote, new Pentecost, quote, diversity of religion and culture. Diversity of religion. A new Pentecost based on the diversity of religion. Once again, folks, it doesn't matter what's absolutely true. It only matters what's expedient for the moment with what we're trying to achieve in our global movement. In the Amazon region of South America, Francis sees as a template for the world. The Pope and his co-laborers at the United Nations truly intend to leave no religion behind. It doesn't matter if you're Buddhist, Hindu, pagan, Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. We're all part of the same big family, right? We just need to learn how to peacefully coexist so we can save the world. What do people mean when they say save the world? Well, there's a good question, right? When people say this, we need to do this because we need to save the. Typically what they mean is they want to stop something from happening that seems to be happening, which is the climate seems to be changing. Is it? Pope Francis on Earth Day 2020 made a statement like this. He says, "We have sinned against Mother Nature and she will not forgive our trespasses." She will not forgive our trespasses against the great Gaia. We see these natural tragedies, which are the earth's response to our maltreatment, Pope Francis said. He says, I think, quote, "I think that if I ask the Lord now what he thinks about this, I don't think he would say it is a very good thing. It is we who have ruined the work of God." Like God is surprised by this, saying the earth was not an endless deposit of resources to exploit. He said, quote, "We have sinned against the earth, against our neighbor, and in the end, against the Creator." In the news from Reuters, Pope Francis praised the environmental movement on Earth Day 2020, saying it was necessary for young people to, quote, "take to the streets to teach us what is obvious. That is, there will be no future for us if we destroy the environment that sustains us." Well, of course, these are some tautologies here, some obvious statements, but where's the evidence would be the question there. Francis, who wrote a major encyclical in 2015 on the defense of nature and the dangers of climate change, dedicated his general audience broadcast. This means the general audience is just a broadcast from his library. And instead of doing it in the square, he did it from his library because of the lockdown. He recounted a Spanish proverb that God always forgives. Man sometimes forgives, but nature never forgives, Francis said. If we have deteriorated the earth, the response will be very ugly. He says, "I sincerely hope for growth in awareness and true repentance on the part of us all, men and women of the 21st century, believers or not, and on the part of our societies for allowing ourselves to be carried away by logics that divide." What is that? What is the logic that divides? Well, that is truth. That would be proper theology, a proper a scriptural, cultural theology. According to him, that would be one of those things that divides. What did Jesus say about truth? That it will divide. So who is this speaking? This man who is known as the vicar of Christ, the replacement for Christ while he's away. He says it would be good to ask the poor for forgiveness. Then we could repent sincerely, including for the harm done to the earth, the sea, the air, the animals. And this is from his book called Mother Earth, which was put out in 2019. Here it is, Nostra Madre Terra, Mother Earth, our Mother Earth, it says. And you can see some of the, you can find this for yourself out there. You can see some of the statements here about forgiveness and repentance. In one of the extracts, the Holy Father, according to this, quote, Holy Father, says that without people's true repentance about their lifestyle, the fight for the protection of the environment will be futile. He says, quote, I sincerely hope for growth in awareness and true repentance on the part of us all, men and women in the 21st century, what we just read for you. Talks about goodness and love. Of course, we don't need logics that divide, so how can you have goodness and love when there are no truths? Pope also points out in his book that at present there is the awareness that phenomena such as contamination, climate change, desertification, environmental migration, unsustainable consumption of the planet's resources, acidification of the oceans, and decrease in biodiversity, these are, quote, are inseparable aspects of social inequity. So it's pretty clear which side of the argument here that the Pope is on. Let's look at this little piece right here. I'll let you hear from the man himself. So what we like to do, we like to use their own words, quote them.
During his general audience on the 50th Global Celebration of Earth Day, Pope Francis spoke of the importance of caring for the environment.
A causa dell'egoismo siamo venuti meno alla nostra responsabilità di custodi e amministratori della terra. L'abbiamo inquinata, l'abbiamo depredata, mettendo in pericolo la nostra stessa vita.
He pointed out that today's environmental challenges are the result of human actions.
E come reagisce la terra?
It's how the earth reacts. The earth reacts. The earth is alive. It's, after all, it's Gaia.
C'è un detto spagnolo che è molto chiaro in questo e dice così: Dio perdona sempre. Noi uomini perdoniamo alcune volte sì, alcune volte no. La terra perdona mai.
The Pope also
Does God always forgive? The first claim there. Is that true? Let's just start there.
expressed his appreciation for the numerous global initiatives dedicated to protecting the environment, referring indirectly to the Fridays for Future movement launched in Sweden by Greta Thunberg in 2018.
Apprezzo sinceramente queste iniziative e sarà ancora necessario che i nostri figli scendano in strada per insegnarci ciò che è ovvio, vale a dire che non c'è futuro per noi se distruggiamo l'ambiente che ci sostiene.
Yeah. So we need the children. Actually, here we have the pontiff. We have the religio-political power that is the Roman Catholic system telling us that what we need to do is let the children lead. Boy, what confidence that must give the children. Never mind that, well, if you understand the art there, that disgusting work of art directly over the Pope's head there. We won't get into that today, but
specifically mentioned two important upcoming events, the 2020 UN Biodiversity Conference to take place in China in October, and the UN Climate Change Conference set to take place in Glasgow in November.
Del sacro rispetto per la terra.
Okay, so there's that piece. There was another piece here. I just didn't have time to play it, but Idris Elba, actor Idris Elba, in an interview with Oprah, suggesting that the planet created the virus, to eradicate humanity. So we hear things like this, like that the message out there is that the planet is alive, and she's fighting back. The reason this has been able to happen is, well, it's because that we're compulsory public education, indoctrination into global citizenship, for one thing. And how's that possible? Is because, for the most part, at least in the United States of America, we are biblically illiterate. So people can come along and say whatever they want, and for the most part, evangelical Christians just follow along. They don't question it. How in the world could someone like Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, Todd White, how could they be allowed to continue the way they have if people were biblically literate, actually read their Bibles and had firm grasp on theology? So let's look at some more examples of where we see this coming in the world. Luke Jerram's earth artwork, Gaia at Coventry Cathedral. This is what you're seeing here, play here. Now, I'll admit, this is some very interesting and beautiful artwork, but what's behind it? What are we actually seeing here? An illuminated planet Earth sculpture installed in a cathedral ruins as a part of a peaceful festival. A 7-meter diameter, 23-foot globe by artist Luke Jerram has been to locations around the world and recently seen at the COP26 meeting in Glasgow. The piece should give a renewed sense of responsibility for taking care of the environment, said organizers. Let me just stop for a second and make sure that anyone who might be, nobody's, remember I said this earlier, I wanted to make that clear. Nobody's saying that we should just pilfer the planet to extinction, that we shouldn't. No, we're called. If you have a strong theology and you are biblically literate, you understand that you're to be a good steward of the planet. And what does that look like? That looks like personal responsibility, liberty, private property, Christian concepts, honoring God, all of Christ for all of life. Everything you do to the glory of God. That's how you keep the planet clean. And, like Peterson said, doing everything to the glory of God, bringing up those in poverty, bringing them up so that they're able to do something themselves. The piece should give renewed sense of responsibility for taking care of the environment, said organizers. The sculpture entitled Gaia is on display at Coventry Cathedral from November 5th to November 7th. It's gone now. But there you go. Some world leaders enjoying it. The artist said, when you look at this artwork, you don't really see borders between countries, the artist said. That's right. That's because borders are hyperreal. You realize we're living on this thin, fine slither of an atmosphere, and we're all interconnected. And what we do in one country affects another, and we all have to get along. Why? Why do we all have to get along? Let's just stop there. Why, as the artist suggests, do we all have to get along? Why? According to what standard? According to Gaia? Does Gaia speak to us? Has Gaia given us her word? Has Gaia told us any way to live our lives? Has Gaia offered us salvation in any way? Why do we all have to get along? According to what standard? He's borrowing from the Christian worldview. That's the only reason anyone would assume we have to get along is because there's something known as good and evil. And without a transcendent authority defining what that is, then who cares if we get along? The installation features detailed NASA imagery of the Earth's surface, allowing visitors to see the planet in its true three-dimensional scale. I'm sure that triggers a lot of people. The especially made surround sound composition is played alongside the sculpture. And here it is in I think this is the Hall of Benediction. I mean, it's just a lot of things. I mean, it is awesome, pretty awesome piece of art, but the context and what's going along with it, with all these things that we're talking about here today, there is a growing new world religion. There are a couple of them. Which one's going to win out, or are they just going to merge into one ecumenical force? On providing a backdrop at the COP26 conference, the artist said, I hope it helped focus the minds of the world leaders perhaps to make sure they do what they say they're going to do and save the planet. What else would you say if you were a world leader? No, I'm going to destroy the planet. I'm going to let it. Of course, they're going to say they're going to save the planet, but do they have any real solution? It's not about a solution. It's not about an answer. It's about control. We know this. Gaia is part of the city's Peace Festival 2021, with events taking place until November the 15th. All right, so there's that little piece. Where do we see this coming up in the news? Well, let's go to The Guardian, of course. Beware, Gaia may destroy humans before we destroy the Earth. Okay. It says, I don't know if it's too late for humanity to avert a climate catastrophe, but I'm sure there's no chance if we could continue to treat global heating and the destruction of nature as separate problems. That is the wrong-headed approach of the United Nations, which is about to stage one big global conference for the climate in Glasgow, having just finished a different big global conference for biodiversity in Kunming. This division is as much of a mistake as the error made by universities when they teach chemistry in a different class from biology and physics. It is impossible to understand these subjects in isolation because they are interconnected. The same is true of living organisms that greatly influence the global environment. The composition of the Earth's atmosphere and the temperature of the surface is actively maintained and regulated by the biosphere. Actively regulated and maintained by the biosphere. It maintains itself? You see the problem, right? It just maintains itself. It does it because it's conscious. Really, see what we're talking about? This is ridiculous. Always borrowing from the Christian worldview. It says maintained and regulated by the biosphere, by life. What is life? How did life happen? By chance? By what the ancient Greeks used to call Gaia. Oh, okay, so this is our religion now. Almost 60 years ago, I suggested our planet self-regulated like a living organism. But why? Where did it come from? From the Greek gods? From the amplified humanity? Come on, your gods are very weak. Your gods are very, very small and weak. It says, almost 60 years ago, I suggested our planet self-regulated like a living organism. I called this the Gaia theory, and was later joined by biologist Lynn Margulis, who also espoused this idea. Both of us were roundly criticized by scientists, rightfully so, in academia. Probably at that time, 60 years ago, the Christian worldview was still present in informing scientific endeavors. I was an outsider, an independent scientist. And the mainstream view then was the neo-Darwinist one, that life adapts to the environment, not that the relationship also works in the other direction, as we argued. So, not better. In the years since, we have seen just how much life, especially human life, can affect the environment. Speaking of this neo-Darwinist theory, problems galore. As with every day that goes by, Darwinism becomes, well, less and less and less likely, less accepted. It's just that you're not allowed to, you can't say it out loud if you work in the field. You'll be ostracized. 2 genocidal acts, suffocation by greenhouse gases and the clearance of the rainforests, have caused changes on a scale not seen in millions of years. Because subjects like astronomy, geology, and meteorology are taught separately in schools and universities, few people are aware of the natural forces affecting the Earth's surface temperature. I would agree with that. Now, there's a true statement. For billions of years, well, let's just stop right there. For billions of years. Evidence? Why billions of years? Why not thousands of years? Why billions of years? Well, because Darwin, because evolution, right? That's why. Because science. For billions of years, the Earth's surface temperature has been determined mainly by the radiant heat coming from the sun. This energy increased, but why? Why didn't the sun stop? Anyway, the energy increased over time because it is the nature of stars like the sun to increase their heat output as they grow older. But temperatures on Earth remained relatively stable thanks to Gaia. Forests, oceans, and other elements in the Earth's regulating system, which kept the surface temperature fairly constant and near optimal for life. The global warming that concerns all of us, and which will be discussed in Glasgow at the COP26 includes a great deal of extra heating that comes as a consequence of extracting and burning fossil fuels since about the middle of the 19th century. Once again, this is debatable. Debatable. Not settled. Not settled in any sense is not settled science. That releases methane, carbon dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere. They absorb radiant heat and stop it escaping the Earth. This is what causes global warming. The amount of global warming depends hugely on the properties of water. When cold ice forms, much of it is white snow. This reflects the sunlight back to space and is cooling. But when it is warm, the water vapor in the air is a powerful greenhouse gas that makes it warmer still. Now, he goes on to say here, warnings that come warnings that once seemed like the doom scenarios of science fiction are now coming to pass. We are entering into a heat age in which temperature and sea levels will be rising decade by decade until the world becomes unrecognizable. You can find just as many arguments from the other direction. It's the assumption here is that this is all settled. We could also be in for more surprises. It says, nature is nonlinear and unpredictable. Let's just take that one on. Is nature unpredictable? How could you do science at all if nature was unpredictable? If, like we said before, if hydrogen and carbon don't do today what they did yesterday, how can you make any predictions whatsoever? The fact that you can make these predictions proves that nature is linear and is predictable. But he says here, nature is nonlinear and unpredictable, never more than at a time of transition. And that is the argument, that we're in a time of transition and that human beings have caused it. Lowering these risks and adapting to those we can no longer avoid will require a mobilization of resources on the scale of a war economy. Are you aware of what Prince Charles has said recently? Ice Age Farmer covered this nicely, calling for a war footing on climate change. We need to attack this on a war footing, as though we're up against. Now, in a war, what do you need to have a war, right? You need an enemy. Well, who's the enemy? It's you. It's me. It's humanity is the enemy. We have no choice, they say, but to reduce the burning of fossil fuels or face even worse consequences. But we should also not become over-reliant on renewable power. That's a reasonable statement, I think, which will leave us with an energy gap. We need to build more nuclear power stations to overcome that. Well, this is refreshing, at least to hear that point. I would agree with that. Though the Greens will first have to get over their overblown fears of radiation. So, as you can see, we can find things to agree on, can't we? He says, I'm not hopeful of a positive outcome at COP26, knowing who is participating. Was not invited to Glasgow, though it is hardly a surprise, as well as being 102 years old. I am an independent scientist. I didn't give you his name, did I? This is James Lovelock. He says here, the dangers are nowhere near as bad as they're often painted. I've traveled millions of miles by air, and all that time I've been exposed to levels of radiation that are 10 times as great as at ground level. The dangers are exaggerated. We also need to address the problem of overpopulation and to urgently halt the destruction of tropical forests. Who would disagree with that? No one would disagree with that. No one's going to say, yeah, let's destroy more tropical rainforest. Who's going to say that? Well, maybe some Dr. Evil character, but most of all, we need to look at the world in a holistic way. But here we go. My fellow humans must learn to live in partnership with the earth. Otherwise, the rest of creation will, as a part of Gaia, unconsciously move the earth to a new state in which humans may no longer be welcome. The virus may well have been one negative feedback. Gaia will try harder next time with something even nastier. So there you go. There's where Gaia is showing up in the news. Here's more. Gaia message must be heard by COP26, delegates letter. Just someone responding to the article that I just read, thanking them for publishing Lovelock's article. It explains the climate crisis so clearly that we feel it should be compulsory reading for all delegates to COP26. We need to establish our religion, they're saying. It explains the climate crisis so clearly that we feel it should be, I said that, didn't I? We have an extra frisson of interest, as Lovelock's 1975 New Scientist article, The Quest for Gaia, was co-authored by Sidney Epton. Our father, Dad, who died in 2007, would have been delighted to see that an article written almost 50 years ago is relevant today. The Quest for Gaia, which looks like this, from a New Scientist in 1975, New Scientist magazine, The Quest for Gaia. Okay, that's where we're seeing it in the news. Now let's get back to Vatican, where recently at the Hall of Benediction, I believe it is, I've got a couple clips. We're going to hear first of all from Youth for Climate. The message. Remember what the Pope said? We need for the kids to be in control. That's reasonable. Okay. Anyway. Hopefully the audio is
Your Eminence.
Enough.
In these past few days, a number of young people have gathered in Milan to discuss their ambition for a different planet. As Youth for Climate, let us listen to the experience rising from these days to Federica Gasbarro, who will tell us their expectations for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Ringrazio il Santo Padre.
I wish to thank the Holy Father, the religious and civil authorities, scientists, for the opportunity given us to give voice to young people listening to them. I'm here today to show you the results of Youth for Climate, an event that is part of COP26. The absolute priorities of the young people of the entire world, represented by 2 delegates for every member country of the UNFCCC, are 4. Economic support to vulnerable countries, because alone they cannot face the catastrophic events of global warming, and they are unable to start the energy transition because simply they do not have energy. 0 emissions by 2030.
And that is the aim. 0 emissions by 2030. I would encourage you to do some research, look for some articles on what do they mean by 0 emissions by 2030. That's something that needs to be defined. I found a couple articles, but see what you can find out there on what do they actually mean by 0 emissions. How are they defining it from country to country or within the United Nations?
School education on the environment and climate change. Ensure that this opportunity is just one of the many others in which young people can fully participate in decision-making processes. On these priorities...
I don't know. Is that good advice? Is that a good idea? Should our children, should our young people who are still being educated, I guess hopefully in some places are still being classically trained to think for themselves, but should we let the young people determine the course of the world? Why is that such a great idea? Well, because it's emotional. Because it's an emotional way to approach the issue, right? You don't want to hurt kids' feelings.
One thing depends on, first and foremost, peace and therefore our future. From the Youth for...
the imagery from this meeting here too. The imagery is stark as well, right? Just the amount of fear, the amount of respect, I guess you would say, for the establishment.
Event, all of us, has brought home an experience of life that has changed him or her forever. We all arrived with our own culture, our own history, that for some...
Wait, mask police, there you go. Get that thing over your nose. That's not allowed.
Looked like a horror film. So everyone arrived with their own traditions. Indigenous youths, young people from the south of the world, young people from Asia, representing 1 billion children and as many adults who are currently suffering from the devastating effect of climate change. Strong emotions, rage in listening to some realities, happiness for getting to know each other and being able to do something, strength in wishing to show that we are up to the mark in this situation. All of us coming home has brought back a part of the other people's heart. Drought, cyclones, destroyed villages. We can still write the end of this story, and our future is not marked.
Droughts, cyclones, weather catastrophes, right? It's all coming from climate change, is that right? Right? That's true. That's true, right?
We must be united and make sure that our common home, planet Earth, can still be called a home with this name.
And that's the fear. That's the fear that they're pumping into the children, is that, look, it's all going to explode. You're not going to have a place to live. Okay, well, is that true? I'll share with you in just a minute. I'll give you some suggestions, some links you can follow to some alternate arguments. Arguments that'll tell you, that'll make the case that no, cyclones, these whatever weather catastrophes the news is reporting on today, no, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the climate changing. Anyway, let's from the Hall of Benediction there's a lot of clips. It's an ecumenical movement. All religious authorities from around the world. This is sponsored by the World Council on Churches. Once again, the syncretism is as evident. No one theology better than the other. It's all the same God, right? Is it? A couple from this website here, nowtheendbegins.com. I'm not saying I endorse this website or whatever, but it had some interesting collection of articles here. United Nations continues to push Gaia worship, saying humans must become vegetarians in order to stop climate change by 2050. Keep in mind, folks, this is not about health. It's not about the climate. It's about control. John Rockstrom, former director of the Potsdam Institute of Climate Change Impact Research, said to have any chance of feeding 10 billion people in 2050 within planetary boundaries, you must adopt a healthy plant-based diet, cut food waste, and invest in technologies that reduce environmental impacts. Now, of course, who would disagree with the fact that we need to reduce environmental impacts? That's smart. That's good stewardship. But all this other stuff, plant-based diet, really? That saves lives? Does it? What was Peterson's suggestion? Let's raise up the poorest among us, and let's do that with nutrition. Let's do it with nutrition, right? Because if we do that, then if those who don't have access to quality food and good protein from meat, if we can do that, then maybe we can produce 1 million more geniuses on the planet. Right? And they can help stop this global takeover here, perhaps. But, that seems to be a reasonable approach, right? Why isn't that part of the answer? Let's increase nutrition, not cut it back. Listen, plant-based diet, folks. It's whatever you feel about it. I've done that before. Vegetarian for a while. If it's your personal choice, hey, then support you on that. But there's no evidence that needs to be mandated for the world. We live in the age of mandates, don't we? It says the great food transformation proposed in the report is at odds with other schemes that aim to tackle greenhouse gas emissions. So, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and idols. They changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. You get that part there? Verse 25. They changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator. From the Daily Mail UK, our food system accounts for between 25 and 30% of greenhouse gases. There's a claim. Where can we get that? Where can we get the evidence? Where can we get the science on that? And is choking the life from fresh and coastal waterways with excess nitrogen. In order to feed the predicted 9.8 billion people on Earth, in 2050 the world will need to produce 56% more food compared to 2010. If the level of meat and dairy consumption rises in line with current food habits, 6 million square kilometers, 2.3 million square miles, of forest would need to be converted to agriculture, an area twice the size of India. All right, so from the United Nations Twitter feed here, without cooking sustainably, linguistics, we can't preserve culture, we can't preserve food practices. Chef Michael says from Nigeria on why he joined the hashtag Act Now Food Challenge. One report by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, proposes to convert areas, as you just read there, the size of India to biofuel crops or CO2 absorbing trees. Nearly all Paris-compatible climate models slot in a major role for a two-step process that draws down carbon by growing biofuels, then captures carbon dioxide released when the plants are burned to generate energy. Check out Ice Age Farmer to see what's happening in the Midwest right now with one of those carbon dioxide recapture pipelines. It's an interesting story. I don't understand all of it, but he'll explain it for you. Here's an article. I was going to share some of this with you. To understand what they mean by zero emissions, zero carbon. This is from iceagefarmer.com. I'm going to drop this one in the live chat right now so you guys can check that one out for yourselves. They give they define some terms. What do they actually mean by zero carbon? You can see here. It's an interesting document. It talks about using traveling here. The impact of our traveling depends on how far we travel and how we do it. The most efficient way to travel is with a large number of people traveling in a vehicle with a small front, and we can all reduce our total annual mileage. So, as Peterson was saying earlier to the young audience, who's very ready to go with attacking climate change, and they're telling everyone you need to stop with your cars, you need to stop consuming so much, you need to stop producing so much carbon dioxide. Okay, you go first. Stop using your phone. Stop driving your car. You first, if you believe in it that much. So what about traveling? So in this document, one of the suggestions is stop using airplanes. I'm sorry, I said aeroplane. Stop using airplanes. Stop using airplanes. Is that reasonable? Take the train, not the car when possible. For example, how do we see those who are telling us to stop using airplanes? Are they stopping using airplanes? I like saying aeroplanes. Use all the seats in the car or get a smaller one. So carpooling. See how that worked out. Nobody really wanted to do that either. Choose an electric car next time. Got no problem with electric cars. Might like to have one myself. But if possible, which will become easier as prices fall and charging infrastructure expands, don't see any problem with that. I just think it should be a choice. Just the same as with the juice, right? If you choose to do it, that's up to you. But why are we shaming one another about the car we drive or the type of medical treatment we receive? When did that happen? Lobby for more trains, no new roads, airport closure, and more renewable electricity. This is an interesting document. Wear warmer clothes in the winter. Now there's a solution to help the climate. Many things in here you can check out. I'll look at this a little closer and share with you what I find from it as well. But I've shared that link in the live chat if you guys want to check that out. Where is Gaia worship showing up? Well, this document here, the reason I shared this with you is this is one that Summer found over at iceagefarmer.com. And what it does for us, what it shows us, what it helps us to understand is this argument that we're making that the climate change movement, the United Nations, this Gaia movement, the Vatican, the world governments, they're seeking, the Great Reset is about full spectrum dominance from the level of the neuron right out to the level of the planet and beyond. They want control of all of it, and that includes you. That includes the human beings on the planet. Now, is there anybody out there speaking reasonably against the tenets of this New World religion? Well, you heard Peterson mention someone earlier, Bjorn Lomborg. And there's articles here to read. You can check this out. You can make your own determination about Bjorn Lomborg for yourself. I'll drop it in the live chat right now, the link to that website. But here is someone who is at least allowed to say it out loud. And here's one of the articles. You want to lock down for the climate? Is that what we need to do? Is that a reasonable approach to saving the earth? From the news to late night shows, much of the media makes it sound as if renewables, solar and wind energy, for example, makes it sound like these things are on the verge of taking over. But that is far from reality, right? And that's what they're indoctrinating the youth to say. We need solar. We need wind power. Okay. In 2019, the latest complete year of data, 81% of the world's energy supply came from fossil fuels, according to the International Energy Agency. If all nations were to fulfill their current climate promises, the IEA estimates that fossil fuel use would still make up 73% in the year 2040. What's the point? It's not about climate change, my friends. It's not about making changes that are good for the world. It's about controlling you. How can this be possible when headlines constantly trumpet the future of solar and wind? Partly, it's that renewables produce mostly electricity, which is only 19% of all the energy the world consumes. The rest is used for things like heating, transportation, and the production of goods like steel and fertilizer. Even if all electricity turned green, most of the world would still run on fossil fuels. Nevertheless, zero emissions by 2030 is what we hear. Is that even possible? Lomborg says, and most electricity isn't green. Almost 2/3 electricity today is still generated by fossil fuels, with nuclear and hydro supplying another quarter. The solar and wind favored by environmentalists generate only 8%. Though renewables are often touted as the cheapest energy source, it's only true when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. Duh, right? If it's still night, you're going to need backup power, typically from fossil fuels. That's the problem with this renewable energy. How in the world do you store it? That hasn't been figured out. Batteries? Well, like Peterson said, go ahead, give it a try. It's been tried. So if it's still night, you need backup power, typically from fossil fuels, which makes electricity even more costly because you need to pay for both the solar panel and the gas turbine. Now you're paying for two sources of energy. Is that really? The European Union, which gets 17% of its electricity from solar and wind, the highest percentage in the world, also has some of the highest consumer electricity costs. Now, this is kind of similar to the argument we hear health-wise out there today, that what everyone needs to do is get juiced, right? Because if you get juiced, then that takes the pressure off of hospitals, right? It's interesting when you look at the data, right? Where you've got the most compliance with the juice, more people in hospitals there. That's about all we can say here. In fossil fuel use, the greenest continent is Africa. Nearly half of its energy comes from renewables, mostly wood, dung, and cardboard burned for cooking and heating, which kills about 700,000 people a year in sub-Saharan Africa with indoor air pollution. More than 500 million Africans lack access to electricity. So there is a way, there is a place, there's something to address. Economic development can move them out of this unenviable position, but it'll also mean Africans will use significantly more fossil fuels than they do today. To give a sense of how much it could grow, California uses more electricity on its pools and hot tubs than all 44 million inhabitants of Uganda consume in total. Just some facts to consider as we listen to this Gaia worship model thrown at us. Cutting fossil fuels as quickly as some environmentalists want will be tremendously difficult. In the year 2020, pandemic lockdowns forced the world to cut carbon emissions significantly. But to fulfill the Paris Climate Accords completely, the United Nations says that global emissions would have to plunge even further every year for the rest of the decade. In 2021, emissions would have to drop by more than double the lockdown-induced decline. And by the end of 2030, they'd have to have fallen by 11 times what they did in 2020. But not exactly realistic, unless the plan is to continue locking down society so people can't move around, to force the numbers down, to force people into slavery. Anyway, this I meant to show you this. Here's the graph on that. So this is showing you fossil fuels used in the global energy supply. If all the nations just did what they said they were going to do to help save the planet, it would still be 73% of by the year 2040. So what are they really up to? What are they really up to if none of these suggestions, none of these policies are actually meant to reduce fossil fuels or carbon or whatever? What are they actually doing? Yeah. It's pretty clear. It's about control. Here's a piece from a little clip on Fox Business, Bjorn Lomborg. Let's hear this.
Can we replace your roof for our next
come on
TV
now.
commercial?
We don't need all
We need
that.
old
Let me
roofs to
mute that while that ad plays. Just bear with me for a second. I'm not delivering my audience to advertisements. There we go. Here's Bjorn Lomborg.
Headline, please. It says, new technology is the answer to climate change, not more targets. Who wrote that? Bjorn Lomborg wrote it, and he joins us now. All right, you say, right, new technology, the answer to the problem, not these targets of getting rid of CO2s by 2030. All right, what new technology are you talking about? Spell it out for us.
Well, if I knew what the exact technology would be, I'd be betting on the market and I'd be very, very rich. But the point here is, if you look at how civilization has overcome almost all problems in the world, it has been through technology. You don't solve problems by telling people, I'm sorry, could you do with less? Could you have a less nice life? Could you freeze a little more in the winter and drive a little less your car? You do this through technological innovation. So there's lots of potential ways. Now, obviously, one of them would be more solar or more wind with lots and lots of cheap batteries. It could also be fission, so the normal nuclear power. It could be fusion. Craig Venter, the guy who cracked the human genome, has this idea of growing oil on the ocean surfaces with gene-modified algae. That could be one other way. There's lots and lots of ideas. We just need one, and that's the one that'll power the rest of the 21st century.
Well, can it come in time? Could you have significant technological development so that you've got renewables of some sort that would really replace fossil fuels quickly, within the, say, 20, 30 years?
Well, The
No.
question is,
No.
can you have it without innovation? And most people are making the bet we're going to make grand promises and we're going to get through mostly without a lot of innovation because we're not investing very much. So right now we're making the bet that we can do this without very much innovation. That is certainly going to fail. Investing a lot more into innovation is not going to guarantee that we can do this in 20 or 30 years, but it'll make it much more plausible. So to put it very bluntly, the Al Gores of the world is saying we'll have a 0 chance of doing our targets. I'm saying, maybe we have 60, 80% chance. It's not a guarantee, but it's much, much better.
Okay, so there you go. Now, once again, I'm not here to endorse Bjorn Lomborg. I'm just showing you here is someone else that's allowed to speak in the public square who is not parroting the same narrative. So check that out for yourself. You read what he's written, listen to what he has to say, and you make the decision for yourself. What we see before us right now is a world, a planet, an ecosphere that changes over time. And, yes, can be very minutely changed locally by the activity of human beings. The notion that we're living on a planet with finite resources and that we ought to be thoughtful, good stewards of our home, that is an appropriate approach to life, to thinking about the climate. However, the idea that science has detected or modeled a looming catastrophe is a topic that is so very subjective from one political or religious or social opinion to the next that it is nearly impossible to make sense of the claims and the fears that are being lamented upon an unsuspecting, mostly ignorant public. I just mean ignorant of the facts. What we do know is that when man thinks of himself as autonomous, he ends up in ridiculous folly. Likewise, when we apply what we already know about the reliability of mass media these days, and combine that with what we know about the opportunistic tendencies of the most powerful people in positions in world government, all of which, nearly all anyway, of which have rejected the absolute authority of God who is sovereign over all of them, well then, with all of that known and in place, well then we are wise to be skeptical of their claims, especially when they're asking us, as Lomborg said, to have a less nice life. When they're asking us to relinquish, what they mean is relinquish liberties. Give up your freedom to us because it's in your best interest. We are wise. We are right to be skeptical about all this. We are right to not trust them to be good stewards of our rights, because the evidence available right now at this time shows us that there is a group of unseen, meaning behind the scenes, individuals, families, powerful controllers of the world, controllers of world wealth, who are attempting a ruse for complete domination over the earth and all its resources, and that includes humanity, and that this is for the purpose of a one world order in which a small group will hold power over all the planet. Dr. Evil is not just a fictional character from a funny movie. Why do you think the concept of such a character exists in the first place? It's because there are those who really do aspire to rule or even own the world and you. That's the truth. That's what we see before us today. Let me remind you folks that let me take you to armoroftruth.net. That's where we're going to be tomorrow night at 7:30. That's where we do our live uncensored show. Of course, also right here at the top of the page here, we've got an article from the Culture Vault. This is what Summer puts together for you guys. There's plenty of research articles in there and uplifting, spiritually nourishing articles in there from people with solid theology that you'll find in there as well. But tomorrow, Black Winter, AoT True Normal, number 11. We'll put out a teaser video tomorrow afternoon. But here's where you can find us at armoroftruth.net. Just scroll down to Black Winter and you'll see, here we go. This is where we'll be. Here's the live chat here on the right. You can register and sign in and join us there. Hit the play button there. A little before 7:30 we'll be on. And we ask you to join us there. This is where we have to, this is the only place where we can actually say what we're thinking, say what needs to be said. Over here on YouTube, we have to be very, very careful. If you'd like to support us, follow the links in the description. Go to armoroftruth.net/donate, because we need your help. We have built an independent live streaming platform where we're able to stream to you, not from BitChute, not from Odyssey or Rumble or anything else. It's our own. And in 2022, it is our plan to be available on Roku and Chrome and Fire and whatever else, whatever streaming devices there are available out there. And we've accomplished quite a bit this year with your prayers and with your support. We set up a 24-hour live streaming channel, True Normal TV on YouTube. We look forward to doing more with that in the days and weeks ahead, including other content creators as we can approach them and make agreements with them to share their content there as well. And we established this independent platform this year. Had 3 big goals this year. The one we didn't get to was being available on Roku and Chrome, but look, 2 out of 3 ain't too bad, considering what we've been able to do through God's grace and through your prayers and your support. This is what it goes for. The building an online media ministry, a mission where we can make sure that there is an answer for something like Gaia worship being shoved down the world's throat. And that's, Lord willing, what we're going to be doing for the foreseeable future. Help us to get funded for 2022 so we can continue to bring this content to you and be a viable response to mainstream media, which is helping nobody, so that we can be a good source to lead you toward pastors who are solid, toward theologians that you can trust, because it's not easy today. So I just wanted to share that with you. armoroftruth.net. Once again, tomorrow night our show titled Black Winter. It is AoT True Normal number 11. You go to the armoroftruth.net website, scroll down, you'll see this. Also, make sure you visit the Culture Vault. Scroll down here. You can see there's a blog that I've got there. I've got a few posts up there now. But visit the Culture Vault and check out all the articles that are available there. Summer's putting articles up there a few times a week. You know, when something relevant pops up, she adds it there. And I do encourage you to check out this post right here. No Compromise, Still Standing for the Gospel. Tony Costa speaks with James Coates, Tim Stevens, and Jacob Room. All in Canada. All have experienced some level of persecution. 2 of them were put in jail for preaching the gospel, for meeting and shepherding their flock. You click on that link, it'll take you to this YouTube link here where you can listen to these 4 men, 3 pastors and one teacher. I believe that's what Tony Costa is. He's Dr. Tony Costa. You can check this out for yourself, and it is very encouraging to listen to these pastors speak boldly about how the church ought to be reacting in these days. We just had a very encouraging moment last week as we asked one of the leaders, one of the elders at the church we're attending, because it's new, we're new there. I asked, okay, what is your position if and when the civil magistrates come in and say you can't meet because it's too dangerous? What is your position? Have you decided what your position would be? And he very quickly shortly answered, we will practice civil disobedience, meaning that we will still meet. And I have to say, that was an encouraging moment. So I want to let you know they're out there. They're out there. Good men, good leaders are out there. But you have to get off the couch, and you have to get off of YouTube, and you have to seek them out. And we'll do our best to help you with that. Check out the website. Yeah, I don't expect, if you live in the United States or somewhere in the South, I expect you to drive to Canada, see these guys. So, if you live in a certain area and you want to ask us, you can ask us. You can send us an email. You're curious about where could I go possibly to find a faithful gospel preaching church who is not going to knuckle under to the civil magistrate's arbitrary mandates. And we'll help you with that. We have an idea. We have methods to seek out and find faithful churches throughout. And if we can't, we'll tell you we can't. We don't know. But email us at hello@armoroftruth.net if you want information on that. Right, here you go. Email us, hello@armoroftruth.net if you have any questions like that, because I'm always going to be encouraging you to get out and get with a body of believers in your area. Don't forsake the gathering. That's our command, right? I understand that it's hard to find good churches. I understand that just going to church isn't going to save you, but it's a command that we get together with other believers. And for me to sit here and say anything other than that would be irresponsible and unfaithful. So I'm always going to tell you that. I'm going to tell you to not treat this like your church. Get out there and get yourself under the leadership of a good gospel-centered pastor. Email us at hello@armoroftruth.net if you'd like a free Bible and a starter pack of tracts. Just say so in the subject of your email and give us your mailing address and we'll send it to you. Also, you can reach us this way through snail mail. Armor of Truth, P.O. Box 729, Hudson, North Carolina 28638. If you want to send in support that way, that would be super. We would appreciate it. If you want to take the chance on cash, you can do that. People have done it, and it's worked. It's been fine. No worries so far. If you want to send in a check or a money order or something like that, just make it payable to Armor of Truth. That's the best way to do it. That helps us out the most. All right, my friends. Thank you for being with us today. I want to invite you once again. Join us tomorrow night at 7:30 at armoroftruth.net. Lord willing, we'll be there speaking freely, boldly. And I'll leave you with this trailer from the Limits to Growth document and presentation that was originally from 1975. Here's a little trailer I want to leave you with. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you next time.
Once upon a time, there was a man who invented chess. The king was so pleased, he offered the man a reward. The man, who was very wise, told the king that he would only want 1 grain of wheat for the first square of the chessboard, 2 for the second, 4 for the third, and so on, doubling the amount for each square of the chessboard. The king said yes, and at the end of the game he had to abdicate, because he had no more grains of wheat to pay his debt. That is the nature of exponential growth, and our chessboard is planet Earth. 40 years ago, a report by a team of scientists from the MIT shook the world. They designed and ran the first global computer model ever, suggesting humanity should adapt to the physical limitations of planet Earth in order to avoid overshoot and collapse.
During the last year, a group of us at MIT have been looking at exponential growth of our global social and economic system. We've been led to 5 basic conclusions. There are physical limits to growth, which, given current trends, are very likely to be encountered even during the lifetime of our children.
This growth is going to stop. It must stop, and it will stop.
Second, the most likely outcome of running into these limits, if we continue to ignore them, is that we'll overshoot those limits and collapse.
I think that many people have found a new way of making fools of themselves in not recognizing that there are limits to human expansion.
We appear to have a viable alternative to this outcome, one in which population and material production could be brought into balance with the finite environment and with our resources.
We have learned that more is not necessarily better. That even our great nation has its recognized limits.
Fourth conclusion is that it's realistically going to take 50, 100 years or more to reach that alternative in an orderly fashion.
We believe then and now there are no limits to growth and human progress when men and women are free to follow their dreams.
And finally, every year we delay decreases our ultimate options.
Their report was published in a book entitled The Limits to Growth, which turned out to be the most controversial environmentalist bestseller of all time.
There can be no doubt what one subject has aroused most controversy among scientists during the past 12 months. I mean, of course, the prospect of doom for mankind because of pollution, overpopulation, overuse of resources.
Well, I think that the conclusions of this study are completely wrong. If you check what happens if you vary all your assumptions together, then I understand from the Science Policy Research Unit at Sussex, who have actually been checking your model, the catastrophe disappears altogether.
That's interesting. I spent all last Friday down with the Science Policy Research Institute, and they didn't indicate that.
Well, you know, this is developing debate who spoke to them last. I spoke to them this morning.
After having spent 40 years fighting for their message, the authors gathered where the Limits to Growth saga began. Which options do they think we have today?
40 years ago, it was still theoretically possible to slow things down and come to an equilibrium. Now that's no longer possible. We are coming into a period of uncontrolled decline. We need now to start focusing specifically on the issue of resilience. If we go through this period of decline without foreknowledge, without preparation, I fear that it will strip away many of our fundamental values.
The need is for early and strong action to avoid the problems that are already here and that will get worse in the future. The horrible fact is that democracy and capitalism will not solve those problems. We do need a fundamental paradigm shift in the area of governance. So it's the national and international governance thing, which is what one ought to be debating when one is looking ahead.
Personally, I'm an optimist. Personally, I believe in the brilliance of human beings. The past 40 years makes you doubt it a little, but I do believe humans are brilliant.
I don't consider myself any better than any other human being, but I have lived for 20 years with these global models. And I can see, I instinctively understand the global results of personal actions that I take. And I know what kind of world I want to live in. I don't want to live in a collapsing world. I don't want to live in a world, as Jürgen says, it's getting grayer and grayer. And it costs more and more and more to maintain even a decent standard of living. I want to live in a sustainable world where there is no poverty, no hunger, and no erosion of the Earth's resources.
According to the Limits to Growth authors, the environmental and economic crisis we are going through are part of the same global crisis. They don't hold the truth, and they have different views on the future, but we should listen to them for the sake of new generations.